Hi friends, I'm Classie Watson, and welcome to Pursuing Peace. I believe our healing is deeply connected to the resilience of our inner peace and how we manifest it in our relationships, our families, and the world around us. So join me as we pave new paths toward healing, learn new perspectives, and share our real stories that help us cultivate deeper connections like never before. Your path to pursuing peace starts now. Welcome to Pursuing Peace with Classie Watson. I'm so excited that you're here with us, and we're going to be talking about and having conversations with community leaders, change makers, movers and shakers around how we start to pursue peace both inwardly and outwardly in our lives. And today we have Abraham Williamson, and I am going to let him introduce himself because he is the man with all of the plans. Abraham, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. And I guess I can't do this intro without starting off with how we know each other, which is from the early days, from childhood days, I guess at the very least middle school, right? Through high school, we both chose to do the International Baccalaureate program, so we got to know each other closer there. But born and raised in North Little Rock, Arkansas, where we met. And then my senior year of high school, during the Great Recession, had to move to Texas my senior year. Then I went off to college and all of that, which maybe we can get into later. But now I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I own my own firm with my business partners, law firm, where we represent creators and innovators and early stage startup founders. And I also host my own podcast, Diverse Tech Founders Podcast, where we just emphasize and focus on people into technology space, investors, ecosystem builders, founders, and all that. But what I like about your platform and what I'm hoping we get into today is when I was in grad school overseas, I focused a lot on some of the questions that you were telling me early on. So I'll leave it at that and we can get into it from there.
Oh my goodness. So but it's been 14 years since we've seen each other in person?
Yeah, at the very least, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Listen, and the energy is still the same, y'all. The energy is still the same.
Unchanged.
I love it. I love it. And everything that you're doing. We've got some a word that I'm enjoying using right now is robust. So we have some very robust questions that are going to be very challenging, yet thought-provoking. And I think it's going to be really important for us to dive deep.
Yeah.
That's the space I've been in here recently. Decreasing in different areas of my life so that I can increase my level of depth, of service, and of value.
I love it.
And that's why the resurgence of the podcast and Pursuing Peace is here. And of course, with your guidance, because y'all, the last episode of my previous podcast was with Abraham. So how fitting that we start the new chapter with him again.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to getting in because the questions that you have for us today, I think, are ones that we often don't discuss publicly, but a lot of us are probably thinking about it or would if prompted to do so.
Yeah, so let's dive in, but I won't dive in too deep just yet.
Okay.
Slowly. We'll slowly get into the depths of that water. Okay, slowly. But let's talk about peace.
Yeah.
When you think about peace, Abraham, what comes to mind for you about peace in your life and how you've started to pursue peace in your endeavors and efforts with what you've been creating?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I think about peace, I immediately think about the absence of external forces acting on me. Even if they're present or around me, they don't impact me. And I think that gives peace sort of a stronger foundation. I mean, a lot of people think about war, which is very much an external threat, but to me, peace is the absence of that. It also makes me think a little bit about how we're motivated. I was having a recent conversation about this extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. And you can be high performing, doing well, seemingly in control, but if you're motivated by things like grades, like when we were in school, or money or fame or fortune and things like that, you can have success without peace versus peace where you're intrinsically motivated and you kind of bring peace with you. So I don't know if that's a precise definition, but that's what it sort of means to me.
Yeah, and that's the question, what does it mean to you? And the reality is I agree 110%. When I think about my journey in life and what I've decided to create and build and do, it has been from that intrinsic motivation. It's been from my desire to serve and to give. And with that brings that peace internally for me. I mean, we see it every day with, with celebrities and people who have the fortune and the fame, but they don't have the peace. They don't have the happiness, because yes, money can buy you a lot of things that can give you experiences where you experience moments of joy, where you experience moments of elation. But still at night, when you turn off the lights and you're in the solitude of your room, is there true peace that's there internally for you?
Absolutely. Can you look in the mirror and like the person who you see?
Yeah.
I think that's definitely an element of peace, is being able to sit with yourself. But again, I want to stress, if you will, that peace is also something that you can bring to other people.
Yeah. So how do you bring peace to other people since we're here? How do you bring peace to other people in your life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll give maybe some superficial examples. I remember a few years ago, I was checking out with one of my friends, actually from high school as well. And we were at the checkout, I think at like Walmart or Kroger or something like that. And I like dropped my card or something like that. And I just kind of like paused, went down to pick it up very like simply. And he was just like, wow, you're so chill all the time. And I think in terms of bringing peace to others, it's being able to be in an anxious environment or when there's a lot of anxiety around you, and to be able to decrease other people's anxiety. To me, that's just like a tangible, practical example of being able to do that. And I don't know about you, but I encounter a lot of people that have anxiety. I have, anxiousness, I guess, in myself. But to me, people are attracted to a secure, kind of like peaceful aura, and it's contagious with other people. So that's one way I think you can bring peace to other people. Another way, I think, is allowing people to not feel judged. I know it's kind of like maybe a basic thing to bring up, but in a lot of ways, a lot of the fear and anxiety comes from this social punishment that we receive when we are a little bit outside the box. So I think you can bring peace to other people by simply allowing them to live out their lives as they see it, and to be a calming, force in their environment where they feel like they don't have to do anything except for be themselves.
I just love that you gave such a simple example of like being at the grocery store and just picking up a card. I'll tell you, when I was talking to my mom on the way here, I was just like, Abraham, he's so chill. He's so, all of those things, right? And exactly what you're saying is so true. It's the presence of poise, of gravitas, right? And of conscious awareness and mindfulness of other people around you. And the fact that we're all carrying different baggage, grief, hurt, and pain with us into every room that we step into. Yep. So, like, as a trained therapist, make sure I don't say it because I'm not licensed yet, you guys, okay? I'm working on that. But as a trained therapist, being in my internship, having to sit through spaces where clients were saying things, like I had clients saying the N-word, not to me, but in expression of what their upbringings were, how they're trying to heal from the different ideologies that they were taught throughout their childhood, right? And they would be like, I'm sorry, I don't want to offend you. And I'm like, walk in your truth. Because the way we get to inner peace is to walk through all of what we've went through, all of what we're trying to overcome in order to reconcile it with ourselves and have that acceptance. So then we can stop running from the fears of, I don't want to turn into that person. If I accept these bad parts, does that mean that I have to keep being this bad version of myself, quote unquote, right? If we want to say good and bad, I try really hard to steer away from that, right? I like to say more like effective, ineffective, or, some things like that, because I think that'll be another topic for another day, right? But the perception of what's good and bad, it just really depends on a lot of what we've been taught, right? And so we behave in different ways, but I like that presence, the presence of poise and being able to say, okay, I'm in a space where there's anxiety. I'm in a space where I can feel the different energies. I remember I called a friend of mine, a young lady, we're developing a friendship. And so as you're developing a friendship, right, like we're courting each other. Yeah. So she's getting to know me, I'm getting to know her. And she had commented in a group chat. And I felt her anxious energy. And I'm like, I wonder if she's okay. Let me check in with her. Yeah. And in her mind, she's like, well, what's wrong? Did I say anything wrong? I was like, no, there was nothing wrong. I sensed your energy and I just wanted to check in with you. And in that moment, she was actually having a difficult time. She was at the airport with her 2 young toddlers, trying to move through all of the different things. And so I just spoke to her for a little bit and gave her a little bit of encouragement, and then, went on about my day and she went on about hers. But being able, that sense of awareness, and I think that does require a lot of self-awareness when we're talking about that peace and that mindfulness of it, inwardly and also externally.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head, to use your phrase, like, you get peace and you give peace, exist in peace, around it, work towards it, not because you haven't experienced anything, right? But because you have, and a lot of the fear comes from this unknown. And I remember reading this book called Life Unlocked by Dr. Serini Pillay. That was probably back in like 2014, but he was a, I guess, psychologist or therapist at Boston General with a lot of like Harvard students who were coming in there, very anxious, trauma and all that. And I remember something very clearly that he said in that book, which was that we often our anticipation is often worse than the reality. And I think when you go through things, it allows you to enter other spaces, kind of having a knowingness of you've been through this before. So I think it's great that you reached out to this person, because a lot of us see things that are happening, but we don't speak up. Yeah. We don't say anything. So if you're watching this right now, take the action, take the step, because it can save somebody's day, maybe even their life.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, because we get into this see something, say something culture only when there's like massive movements behind it, right? Yeah. When we're talking about our friendships, we really, and our relationships that we're cultivating outside of ourselves, we really have to be mindful, and we really have to decide and discern what type of friendships do I want to have, and who do I want to be as a friend? How do I want to, and it really, again, it starts with us. It starts with our friendship with ourselves. And I'm a person that I hold me accountable. Mm-hmm. I hold myself in high regard as far as integrity. Yeah. And I try to maintain peace and learn emotional regulation and all of those things. And so the people that I'm cultivating around me, I want that for them too. And I want them to want that for themselves. Now, if they don't, that's okay. But a part of my friendship that I have cultivated for how I want to operate as a friend is to say, how can I show up? Yeah. How can I show up, and not show up with a text of, prayers and wishes. And sometimes that's all we have to give, and that's okay. Yeah. But in my immediate circle, I'm actively practicing, how am I actually showing up? I had a friend who lost his wife last year, and I baked him a big casserole. And I went and I sat with him. He's a therapist, and I went and sat with him, and we talked for hours. And then he went home, ate the casserole, tasted, this is amazing, this is so good. But I said, how can I show up and really physically show up? Yeah. Even when I'm busy, even when I don't have the time. And I think for me, that's also a way that I pursue peace for myself and with my relationships, because I don't want to ask of somebody that which I'm not willing to give. Yeah. So I exactly what you said, and I went down, a little bit of a tangent there, but all of that to me kind of correlates and molds into that peace that I want in my life, because I'm spreading that peace into my relationships and trying to help my people still be whole, even through their grief and pain and hurt as they heal.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as we're teeing up the next question, just because you said friendship.
Come on.
One thing that has helped to give me peace, or to soothe me a little bit, was recognizing that you're not going to be friends with everybody or please everybody. In fact, I don't know if the numbers on this are accurate or not. It's a rough basis, but a third of the people are going to like you, if you're lucky, maybe even love you. Yeah. A third of the people are going to hate you no matter what you do. Mm-hmm. There are going to be haters out there. And then a third of the people really aren't going to care either way. Mm-hmm. But the third in the middle is going to respect you if you take care of the people you like you, because that's admirable, that's respectable. And you can invest more when you're not trying to please everybody. So when you really do just try to satisfy the people who are on your team, on your squad, like that, to me, that gives you peace and reciprocity, and it's an investment worth making.
There you go. And that's what we have to look at. It's an investment. I'm depositing into my bank of friendship, you know, and I want it to grow, right? Like I'm going to invest that stock. Don't let me get down into that because I don't know all of it, right? But I'm going to invest that, right? And I'm trying to see it, you know, continue to grow tenfold, you know, and I think that's really important. As we're talking about, you know, peace and our friendships and investing in having peaceableness in our relationships and also within ourselves, with the state of the world today, there's a lot that we see around the ideology of peace or pursuing peace that is very selfishly motivated. What is your take on pursuing peace in conjunction with selfishness and kind of what we see a lot of people talking about right now?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And in a different way, something that has been on my mind for several years now. So after undergrad, I went overseas for grad school at Cambridge, Trinity Hall, and it was just for 10 months. I got an opportunity to do more traveling than I ever had, sort of in Europe and even in South Africa. And one of the questions that I was looking at was, you know, a lot of people approach today's social issues from a critical perspective, from a critical lens. This is the power, we're the powerless, how do we fight it and battle it back and forth? And I was very much wrapped up in that. But what I asked myself is that, like, what comes after that gets worked out? Like, what comes later? So I started looking more into, like, this post-conflict pedagogy and was still working through what that actually means, because I don't know if we have an example about that. But one element that I think would certainly be there is this concept of mutual vulnerability. And I'll explain that in just a second as I understand it. But you positioned it well by saying, like, selfishness is a threat to what it is that you're trying to cultivate here. And mutual vulnerability, as far as I know, essentially just says you're putting the other person first. If you think about, like, the South Africa is where I actually kind of came into a bit of this understanding, is where you acknowledge that the person on the other side also has some anxieties and vulnerabilities, right? Like, let's say that we're, you know, Black folks in America, right? Like, we have been subjugated for, you know, hundreds of years, right? At the same time, how do we get inside the head of the people who are living in the genealogy or the lineage of the people who were doing the subjugating? Like, there's a certain element of maybe guilt, shame, powerfulness, maybe even they like some of it and they don't know how to deal with the fact that they don't want to give up that power. Like, how do we actually think about what they may be thinking about? That's us being vulnerable, and that's very costly. So in turn, they should be thinking the same thing. Oh, what would I do if I, you know, didn't have what I have? How would I be feeling? And if all of us are sort of thinking in that way, selfishness has to kind of fall to the wayside in that exercise, and that will help us get closer to peace. So I think it was helpful to think about that in a situation that I didn't know personally, to be more objective about it. Same thing when you look at the other atrocities in history. Like, another example was, you know, Nazi Germany as well, like thinking about the second and third generation, you know, impact of that. So when I think about these types of questions, that always comes to the fore. In fact, I was in Harlem recently at Soul Summit, hosted by one of my friends I actually met in Arkansas too, Reverend Stephen Green. And there was a conversation with a group, you know, of pastors and then a group of folks who were activists who felt a bit alienated by the church because of their, you know, social behaviors, decisions, you know, identity. And when we asked the question, well, what would they need to do to win your approval and vice versa? That was where the conversation had always ended previously. So there was no answer to that. And I think mutual vulnerability is key there for moving forward. That's a roundabout way. I don't know if I lost myself or anybody else going through that, but that's what it means to me.
Yeah, I don't think you lost anybody. And for those of you that are watching and listening, ask yourself, how are you practicing mutual vulnerability? You know, as I stated earlier, and as Abraham just hit right on the nail on the head, is we are all carrying something. And when we take a mindful approach to honestly owning, accepting, and recognizing that, how can you go into the world and practice mutual vulnerability? Maybe start in your home, start with your friend circle, and see if you're having conversations where you don't share the same opinion. Or maybe your experience has been different, your background, your upbringing, and what you've been exposed to. How can you learn to cultivate mutual vulnerability inside of your current relationships? And that'll help you learn to start carrying it into the world, because I think that is where it gets really hard. Sometimes, like we said when we started this episode, we're having these conversations in the privacy of our homes with our friends or people who have maybe like-minded ideologies, upbringings, and backgrounds. So we don't really get to explore perspectives outside of our norms. And as such, we tend to continue to operate in a selfish way. And I think, like you said, when we start to practice mutual vulnerability, it changes the game. Mm-hmm. It changes it. And it also helps us start to cultivate more peace within ourselves, because we don't have to walk in a room or in a space trying to prove anything.
Right.
We don't have to walk in a room, in a space, and try to conform or feel like we need to conform to the community of people that are in there, whether they look like us or don't look like us, whether they talk like us or don't talk like us. I think that's a lot of us in the world judging ourselves, judging other people, in multiple aspects, right? Like judging who we are, how we look, what we look like, how we speak, how we don't speak, our vernacular, our this, all of these different sorts of things. And in the age of a lot of internet guruism that's out there, you have people doing that as a part of their career, as a part of their platform, judging people, telling them how they should be, who they should be. And how in the world am I going to find peace in myself if somebody's always telling me that I'm not good enough? And now it's not somebody in my immediate circle. It's a random internet person who I dialed in on their live, and they only know the tiniest fraction of what I shared with them in 2.5 seconds. Yeah. And now they've judged my entire existence. Yeah. And told me who I can be. And so now, where's that mutual vulnerability in those types of conversations?
So let's stay here for a minute, because I think you're spot on. This is something that I have been dealing with recently, is criticism or judgment. Yeah. And the question I ask myself now is, well, what if they're right? And in a lot of ways, it's like, wait a minute, because we want to entrench ourselves in protect our own egos and all that. Yeah. But I remember reading a book. Well, my dad is a preacher, a minister, and he's always reading and encouraging me to read like all of these books on how to think, lessons from the text and all of that. And there was one on Solomon where he was mentioning, loving criticism more than adulation. Because in the criticism, that's where your growth is. And it stings, it's tough to hear, and maybe all of it isn't right. But I try now to look for the one thing that I can use from those encounters to move forward. And to be quite honest, it takes the sting out of it for me. I mean, it's still, you still feel it. But as we're talking about peace, how can we have peace if we're constantly seeing threats everywhere? Even if people are trying to attack us, not to get like Art of War, Sun Tzu or anything, but to sort of use that energy against whatever that threat is for your benefit.
Yeah, I love that, because one of the things that I always say is in a learning environment, there is no room for ego or defensiveness. I'm going to say this to you. In a true learning environment, there is no room for ego or defensiveness. When you're in a classroom with your professor, and that professor's telling you what are the principles of mathematics in this, you don't go and argue with that professor. You don't walk in and say, well, I think I know math a little bit more than you. You don't. You humbly reconcile that information and integrate it into your person and into your understanding, right? And like exactly what you're saying, how do I take what's beneficial from this criticism and say, you know what, there is a part of that was correct, that I've been struggling with. How can I reconcile that? Dang, this random stranger knew a little something, And how do I integrate that message, only that message, right? Not maybe the other nuanced noise that might have been, because, some of them get a little rambunctious, right? But how can I integrate that information into my life, my lifestyle, my person, and say, okay, yeah, you know what? I'm going to make a change because this is new information and I need to reconcile it and I need to integrate it. And I think that's been a lot of my journey over the last, several years, is a lot of unraveling, a lot of growth. I mean, those 20s to those 30s, right? That transition, and just learning new things about myself, being in situations that I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm even going through this or having to take action or advocate for myself in this type of way. But reconciling that information, reconciling the negative and positive parts, and taking what's effective and integrating it into, oh, this is the lesson that I learned from that.
Yeah. So I have a question for you now, because I have to
give
you your props here recently too, because we haven't known each other for a minute, and I have seen your growth over the years, especially the last couple, as we've sort of re-engaged and, we've kind of bonded over the mutual entrepreneurship paths that we've been on. And so I just want to acknowledge that I see that growth in you and the calmness, and also that you have more to give now. So my question is, what do you think helped you to get there as this progress happens? Because you've always been sharp, you've always been smart, you've always been insightful, but now it seems as though you've tapped into a different element. What would you attribute that to?
Life. I think number one, my mom, who's here in studio with us today in the room. But my mom has always taught me that I have the power within me to grow and to change, right? And that not only is the power within me, but it's divine power, because I'm a God girl, and that no matter what you're going through, you can change it. My mom was a smoker for years. And when I was younger, I just always remember this. We were struggling, and they hadn't gotten her check, and we were needing to get our rent paid, and we had an eviction notice, and she was just so worried, and she prayed and prayed to Jehovah, and she said, I will stop smoking today if they finally cut this check and I can finally get my money so I can pay these bills, so my kids are okay.
Yeah.
Check came through that day, and my mom never picked up a cigarette.
Amen.
Didn't go to the patch, didn't go to anything. I never saw her pick up a cigarette again. Now, maybe if she struggled behind closed doors, that's her story. But I never saw her pick up a cigarette again from that day. And I was maybe 6, 7 years old. And that power of faith, that power of commitment, integrity, there's, just going through my life and remembering that it doesn't matter what I go through. I've gone through a divorce. I've gone through multiple miscarriages. I've gone through some pain. I've gone through some trauma. I've felt the sting of racism and discrimination being a Black woman in business in the South. I've had to do a lot of things against a lot of powerful people to stand up for myself. But only by the grace of God, and only by staying in prayer, talking to my mom. I talk to her about everything to help me see me when I can't. And, you do this every time, Abraham.
This is what happened the last time.
This is what happened the last time. Yeah. But, just having that faith, and knowing that, and then also my training as a therapist helps me, because I have those understandings to be able to fall back on to help myself. So I have coping skills. I have boundaries that I set. I have my own therapist as well that helps keep me accountable along this journey. And I have a good circle of friends that keep telling me, and one in particular, we just had a conversation the other day randomly. I walked in the coffee shop just to grab a tea, ended up in there for 3 hours talking with him. And one of the things that he shared with me is that some people are meant to go deep and not wide. And he told me that he feels in his spirit what he knows of me, that I am meant to go deep and not wide. And he encouraged me. I was like, I've been thinking about closing my photography business. He said, close it. I closed it.
Wow.
I did. And because my power and purpose is ordained in making an impact and helping people find hope and experience healing in their lives the same way that I've been able to. And I do it through being a vessel of God, not maybe pulling out the Bible, reading scriptures every day, but through the likeness of him, through living and leading my life through his image, through the fruitage of his spirit, right? And remembering that that's who I am, and that I am a deep person, and I'm an introspective soul, and I'm a deep empath. And that's really it. So I've had to set boundaries. I have a community that I confide in. When stuff is hard, I'm honest about it. I'm honest. When my friends ask me, how are you? I don't say I'm fine if I'm not fine. Yeah. I say I'm struggling. Today was hard. This happened, and I've been sitting on the couch crying for 2 hours. It's been a hard day. Yeah. You know, and I think willing to be vulnerable. Because I used to wear a cape. Yeah. So, whew.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
But that's how I've pursued peace in my life. Is through that vulnerability and owning my story. Yeah. And also knowing that my story doesn't own me just because I accept that it is my story.
Absolutely. I mean, you embrace it, you see it, you face it. And that's the thing. And maybe that's just a simple exercise that we all can do more. It's just to look in the mirror and have these moments with ourselves so we don't feel like we are pretending to be somebody else. There's a clear line of sight between who we represent ourselves externally and who we are internally, and people can see that and respect that consistency.
Yeah. And that's what I hope. I never wanted for people to see me online and then see me in person and they're like, oh, she is not who she says she is. Right. You know, I've never wanted that. I literally write down the feelings I want to make people feel when they're in my presence. The thoughts I want them to think about me, not because I'm stuck on the perception of what people have, but because I'm stuck on developing and cultivating myself as who I am. This is who I am. So yeah, I want people to be like, oh yeah, Classie, she's going to tell you straight up. She's going to be honest with you, but she's going to be loving with how she says it. She's going to be graceful. People would make fun of me for saying, oh, you have so many flowery words. You're so flowery. And I'm like, yeah. It's just me. It comes naturally. And it took me a while to accept that. Mm-hmm. And so then I started writing down, I want people to say that. I want people to say that I have flowery words. Yeah. I want people to say those things about me. And so that's how I started pursuing peace, you know, within myself and within my life. But I know we've got to get to our next question because now you got me crying and tearing up.
We're going the full cycle today.
But yeah, and I think that's really important because just segueing into our next question is, as we're pursuing peace within ourselves, this is how I've pursued peace in my life and in my relationships. But how do you see us collectively pursuing peace, both like inwardly, at the same time, still trying to manifest and pursue that peace externally? I think a lot of us find it very difficult to be in a world where there's a lack of peace. Right? We have to go out into the world, put on our suit of armor, like we've been talking about. How do I be who I am and also still represent myself that same way in the world? And so how do you find that kind of, that I don't want to necessarily say struggle, but that kind of fight to say, okay, the world, I might have to go to battle a little bit. I'm not sure what's going to come my way, but what have you done to help you kind of stay composed in that element of peace when peace doesn't come at you?
I think we're similar in that you look to those who came before you in your mother. And I'll tell you just a quick little story is I remember last year, I've been more into meditating and I'm not consistent with it, don't do it all the time. But I remember in this particular time, as I was sitting there, I thought back to my grandparents, my grandfather, my grandmother, and what they would have been thinking the first time they held me as a baby. the hopes and the dreams and the fears that they had of me. And I watched myself as I was, meditating on this, live my life and grow up through their eyes. And by looking at it that way, I began to see a little bit more about things that I sort of took for granted and things that they really desired and wanted, and how that showed up when I received it. So to tie that back into today, so then when I kind of come out of this meditation and move throughout the world, I'm not moving through it from this sort of selfish place, like I'm here and, the world's just happy to have me. It's like, no, there were people who had hopes and dreams for me, people who felt like I was a continuation for them. And they did me a favor by allowing me to determine what that meant without telling me, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that. I know that's not necessarily everyone's story, but so in terms of personal peace, I think that's where it comes from. And then I think instead of trying to change the whole world, every time you have an interaction with somebody, that's an opportunity for you to spread that message, and it'll build on itself sort of over time. So I hope that that's the impact that I've been having in different people's lives. You're not going to help everyone, but I consider this, sort of a peace-building activity where you or I can feed off of each other and then go back into the world. Hopefully others see the message and they want to do the same.
Yes, do the same. Pursuing peace, it's like the, paying it forward, that entire movement. And I think it's really important that we continue to have these types of conversations. Do you feel like we will ever, have like world peace? And if so, and if not, or if so, how do you think that we cultivate, a collective peace amongst the world with all of the things that are going on right now?
I think it's possible. I don't know if we will fully appreciate it without having something to compare to, like once we get to that point, because it's like, okay, this is sort of, I'm sure today seems a lot more peaceful than it would have 700 years ago, for example. And I don't know if we fully appreciate how much more peaceful our lives are now. Like your likelihood of dying, 1,000 years ago would have been like 1 in 100 or something like that, versus now where it's a lot less likely that you'll die prematurely. So I hope that that's something that we work towards. But even if we don't look at the entire universe of peace, how can we have peace at dinner time? With your family, how can you have peace? We just finished up the holidays. How can you have peace in the classroom? There are moments where we experience peace throughout the day, throughout our lives, even in coming into the studio. I feel like this was a very peaceful welcome. Thank you, sir. Yes. So how can we build on those moments and just increase those and get a little bit better every single day? Yeah.
And that, again, back to paying it forward. That and if one person does it, right, and then another person does it, and then another person does it, now we have a whole community doing it. Right. Now we have a whole, and then so on and so forth. And we have a whole state doing it. Then we have a whole, right. Or we have more people getting on the bandwagon, joining the movement to say, how can we, pursue peace in this way, or try to have collective peace in our homes and all of these different things. And I think that's really what I want, why I transition this podcast and why I want to have these conversations around pursuing peace, to kind of keep passing the torch and saying, hey, link arms with me, join this movement. Let's pursue peace personally in our lives. Let's look and see where are areas that we're missing.
Right.
Where we're missing moments of being able to bring that peace, of being able to be peace, right? And say, hey, let's join the movement. Let's link arms. So, hey, join the movement. Link arms. How are you pursuing peace right now in your life? I bet there's many of you out there, you are in conflict with somebody. It might be yourself. It might be a sibling, a family member, a friend, a colleague. How can you pursue peace through that conflict? How can you handle it in a peaceful way? Maybe it's your tone. Maybe it's learning communication. One of the biggest things that I learned, and I love Dr. John Gottman and his wife, and one of the things that they've taught is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And those are the 4 horsemen that will ruin any relationship, but they are also the 4 horsemen that will ruin your communication, and any relationship. It doesn't have to be romantic, whether it's romantic, platonic, professional. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, if you are using them in your communication, you need to stop. It is criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. If you do any of those 4, you are creating a barrier to your own peace and the peace of the person that you are speaking with. So I hope that resonated with you. And Abraham, thank you so much for being here and having this conversation, for having me cry, for always asking me the tough questions as well, and making sure that I'm showing up and sharing and giving more of my heart and my soul, because that is never anything that I ever try to shy away from.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a phenomenal conversation. It's been deeply gratifying for me. And if I were to leave folks with one, word of advice or question or anything like that, is to be bold, to be courageous, because all too often we shy away from things that fear really kind of encapsulates a lot of the thought processes that go into the behaviors that we take. So be courageous. I remember, a number of times, like going off, to school is a good example, even starting this firm, there's a lot of hesitation or fear. Be bold, be courageous, even you, leaving your photography business behind, which was successful, but it allows you, it frees up space for more. And just to draw from my grandfather again, when I was born, they say, like, with my hand open. And he said, this person is going to receive a lot and give a lot because their hand is open. It's hard to receive anything when your fist is clenched. And I think a part of that is being courageous and bold. So that's what I would leave the listeners with. And thank you all for having us here. This has been great.
Thank you so much. And we will have Abraham's information listed so you can find Diverse Tech Founders. You can follow his journey and everything that he is doing, because listen, this man is making waves and impacting so many lives right now. Make sure that you subscribe and hit the like button and follow along on the Pursuing Peace journey. Thank you so much. And as always, you are so powerfully purposed. It exists within and around you. As a matter of fact, it was ordained ministry over your life at birth. It is simply your divine destiny and responsibility to get your footing and to start walking the path. Bye. I'm Classie Watson, and thank you for joining us in our pursuit of peace. You can follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and all podcast streaming services. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. But most importantly, join the conversation and the movement to pursue peace together. Until next time, we'll see you on the path to pursuing peace.